behind the barbed wire borders and carefully choreographed parades, there exists a country cloaked in mystery and misery, a land where portraits of smiling leaders watch over starving citizens, where the radio never turns off, and where a misplaced word can lead to generations of punishment. This is not a relic of the Cold War. It is a functioning reality, a regime built not just on oppression, but on myth. North Korea is a country where history is rewritten, borders are sealed, and fear is as abundant as propaganda. But how did this begin? How did an isolated, impoverished state become one of the world's most secretive and brutal dictatorships? To understand North Korea's darkness, we must trace the bloodline of the Kim dynasty, uncover the scars of war, the gulags buried in silence, the hunger that killed millions, and the missiles that now command global attention. This isn't just a story of communism, it's a story of control, of cruelty, of complete submission. This is the entire dark history of North Korea. Before it was a prison of silence, before its borders buzzed with electric wire and propaganda speakers, before the cult of the Kims was carved into every stone and wall, Korea was one, a peninsula steeped in tradition, centuries of kingdoms and dynasties. It had survived Mongol invasions, Chinese tribute, and its own internal strife, but it would not survive the 20th century. In 1910, the sun set for the last time on an independent Korea. Japan, hungry for empire, annexed the peninsula with force. What followed was a brutal occupation. For 35 years, Koreans lived under the whip of Imperial Japan. Their language was banned, their names were changed, land was seized, temples desecrated, and cultural memory erased. Millions were forced into labor. Women were taken, abducted, and enslaved as comfort women for Japanese soldiers. Korea bled. When World War II began, Japan used Korea not as a partner, but as a machine. Resources were stripped, men conscripted, children taught to worship the emperor of a foreign land. But even as the war dragged on, and the world trembled under global conflict, hope flickered, distant and fragile. Then in 1945, it ended. Japan surrendered, its empire collapsed. But for Korea, liberation came with a catch. Two foreign giants, the United States and the Soviet Union, marched in, not to restore Korea, but to divide it. At the 38th parallel, they drew an invisible line. It was meant to be temporary. It became permanent. The Soviets took the north. The Americans took the south. Korea, once whole, was torn in half overnight, without a vote, without consent. In the north, the Soviet military backed a young revolutionary named Kim Il-sung, a former guerrilla fighter trained in Moscow. He was ambitious, loyal to the Soviets, and above all, ruthless. The people were told he was a hero of resistance. His myth was written before his name became history. In the South, American forces installed a separate regime, capitalist, Western-backed, suspicious of communism. The tension simmered as both governments claimed to represent all of Korea. Neither accepted the other's existence. Families were divided, letters stopped. Brothers now stood on opposite sides of a line drawn by strangers. In Pyongyang, the hammer and sickle replaced the emperor's banner. Mass indoctrination began. Kim Il-sung positioned himself as the father of a new nation, one built on Jusha, the ideology of self-reliance. But what it truly meant was obedience. What it truly promised was isolation. By 1948, both sides declared themselves the sole legitimate government of Korea. 2 years later, that invisible line would erupt into war. But the fall had already begun, not through bombs or bullets, but through silence. What came next would bury millions. The war had not yet begun, but in the north it was already being rehearsed in minds, in classrooms, in every corner where resistance had been replaced with ritual. And at the center of it all stood one man, or rather one myth, Kim Il-sung. He didn't rise to power, he was placed there. In 1945, the Soviets needed a Korean face for communism, someone they could shape, someone the people might follow. Kim Il-sung was young, unknown to most Koreans, and loyal to Moscow. He had fought as a guerrilla in Manchuria, but his fame was inflated by Soviet propaganda. What they handed the North wasn't a leader, it was a symbol. But Kim understood power. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to be remembered, not as a man, but as a god. So he rewrote the story. Textbooks were printed that described his heroic battles against the Japanese. His childhood was painted with divine purpose. He was said to have outwitted armies, survived ambushes, and liberated towns. No matter that few of these things were true, truth was no longer required. Soon statues began to rise, first in Pyongyang, then in every city, every village. The people bowed before them, not out of love, but out of necessity. Those who didn't were noticed, and in North Korea, to be noticed was to be watched. The cult began quietly. Photographs of Kim were hung in every home. Citizens were expected to keep them spotless. Inspections were sudden, and dust could be a criminal offense. Radios were fixed to only one channel. The state's newspapers carried no world events unless filtered through the lens of the supreme leader's greatness. Children were taught that Kim Il-sung made the crops grow, stopped the rain, parted the clouds. He was called the eternal president, and even as he lived, his legacy was already being carved into stone. But loyalty was not enough. As he consolidated power, Kim began to eliminate those around him. Political rivals disappeared. Generals were demoted, exiled, or executed. Families were punished alongside them. 3 generations sent to labor camps for a single offense. The state justified it all with a word jushe. On the surface, jushe meant self-reliance. In practice, it meant total isolation and absolute obedience. It replaced Marxism. It replaced history. It replaced religion. The country no longer belonged to the people. It belonged to the image of one man. In 1948, Kim Il-sung officially declared the formation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It was neither democratic nor for the people, but now it had a leader with a godlike presence and an army ready to follow him into fire. In the south, a new government had taken root under Syngman Rhee, but unlike the north, the south allowed contact with the outside world. Western ideas seeped in. Democracy, flawed but functioning, took hold. The south stumbled, but it didn't fall silent. Kim Il-sung saw it all, and seethed. He believed it was only a matter of time before the North would reunify the peninsula under his rule. The Soviets were cautious, the Chinese wary, but Kim was determined. In June 1950, he crossed the 38th parallel, and what followed would tear the Korean peninsula in two, not just with guns but with trauma that echoes to this day. On the morning of June 25, 1950, the silence along the 38th parallel shattered. Tanks rolled across the border. Artillery cracked the earth. North Korean troops surged southward like a tide, sweeping over villages and cities with a fury that stunned even their Soviet advisors. There was no declaration, no warning, just war. Kim Il-sung called it liberation, a reunification of the Korean people under one government, one ideology, one leader. He believed the South would collapse in weeks. His spies had told him its army was weak, its president, Syngman Rhee, unpopular, its people ready to welcome him. But war doesn't follow predictions. At first, the North made gains, seizing Seoul within 3 days, pushing the South Korean forces and their American allies into a corner of the peninsula known as the Pusan Perimeter. For a moment, it looked like Kim's dream of conquest would become reality. Then General Douglas MacArthur struck back. With the backing of the United Nations, the US and its allies launched a bold amphibious assault at Incheon, flanking the North Koreans and severing their supply lines. The tide turned. Seoul was retaken. North Korean troops were pushed back, then routed. UN forces crossed the 38th parallel, this time moving north. They advanced past Pyongyang, past rivers into territory Kim Il-sung had claimed would never fall. It did, but Kim wasn't finished, and neither was the war. As UN forces neared the Yalu River, North Korea's border with China, the Chinese government intervened. Mao Zedong feared an American presence on his doorstep, so, in the dead of winter, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured into Korea under the cover of snow. What followed was chaos. The bitter cold froze limbs, ammunition jammed, soldiers fought with bayonets and fists, civilians were caught in the crossfire. entire towns were leveled. Seoul changed hands 4 times. Refugees walked barefoot through the mountains, carrying what little they could on their backs, some dragging the dead behind them. By 1953, 3 years of carnage had yielded nothing but ruin. The war ended not with peace, but with an armistice. The border was redrawn nearly where it began. Millions were dead, soldiers, women, children, forgotten in frozen fields and unmarked graves. But the most enduring wound wasn't physical, it was personal. Korea had been one nation, now it was 2 countries, 2 ideologies, 2 stories. Families separated by war would never speak again. Letters were banned, phone calls impossible. Across the DMZ, they could only wonder if their loved ones still breathed. In the north, Kim Il-sung declared victory. The war was framed not as a stalemate, but as a divine defense against foreign invaders. His legend grew. Statues multiplied. History was rewritten in classrooms. Kim had defeated the Americans, saved the Peninsula, and cemented his place as the eternal leader. But behind the parades and posters, the land was scorched. Cities lay in ruins. Farmland destroyed. The economy shattered. To survive, Kim turned to control. He purged those who had failed him during the war. Officers disappeared. Civilians were sent to camps, and the foundations of a surveillance state began to take shape. The war had not ended. It had only changed its form from bullets to propaganda, from battles to purges. And from this darkness, North Korea began to transform, not into a country, but into a cult with borders. The fires of war had burned Korea to ash. Cities were flattened, farmland poisoned. Infrastructure, what little had existed, was now rubble. North Korea was broken, and that was exactly how Kim Il-sung wanted it. With chaos came opportunity. As the people starved and mourned, Kim rebuilt, not just the country but the structure of absolute power. The war had been his crucible, but repression would become his empire. He didn't rebuild with prosperity, he rebuilt with fear. In the 1950s and 60s, Kim Il-sung set out to eliminate any threat to his rule, real or imagined. The country was purged, layer by layer. High-ranking officials who had once stood beside him in wartime vanished overnight. Accused of factionalism, revisionism, or disloyalty, they were imprisoned, exiled, or executed. Some were killed publicly. Others were simply never heard from again. No one was safe. If a father was accused of disloyalty, his children disappeared too. If a school teacher questioned the curriculum, her entire family was sent to a labor camp. It was called the 3 generations of punishment rule. Guilt passed down like a curse. Surveillance became a way of life. Neighborhoods were organized into inminban, civilian watch groups tasked with monitoring each other. If you said the wrong thing, if you didn't cry hard enough during a state broadcast, if you forgot to dust the portrait of the supreme leader hanging in your home, you were reported. Even thoughts became dangerous. The borders were sealed shut. Foreign books, films and ideas were banned. Radios and televisions were built to receive only government-approved channels. Typewriters had to be registered. The outside world was painted as diseased, immoral, evil. Inside North Korea, only one truth was allowed. Kim Il-sung was godlike, flawless, eternal. To cement this myth, he expanded his propaganda machine to levels never seen before. His face appeared in every classroom, office, and home. Children were taught that he had created the world Koreans lived in, that he had single-handedly defeated the Japanese, outsmarted the Americans, and invented every useful idea. He was known as the Great Leader, Eternal President, and Son of the Nation. His speeches were scripture, his writings, gospel, his family, divine. While South Korea began to recover under harsh but rapidly modernizing regimes, North Korea poured its energy into building monuments, not factories, temples of loyalty, not libraries. The economy stagnated, but the illusion of prosperity was projected through mass parades and carefully scripted state television. Famine loomed in the countryside, but in Pyongyang, the showcase capital, streets were swept, trees painted, and smiling citizens rehearsed their devotion for visiting cameras. But beneath the surface, something more permanent was being constructed. a prison system so vast, so cruel, that even today, its full scale remains hidden. The Kwan-li-so political prison camps were created during this time. They were not correctional facilities, they were death zones. Entire families were sent there, some for crimes as small as owning a South Korean song, or for failing to attend a public rally. Inmates were starved, beaten, worked until their bodies broke. Torture was routine, rape, common, execution, expected. Most would never leave, and yet from the outside, the regime remained quiet, efficient, disciplined. Foreign communists praised Kim Il-sung as a wise revolutionary leader. Delegations from the USSR and China visited Pyongyang and saw only what they were allowed to see. What they missed was the silence, the emptiness behind the rehearsed smiles. By the 1970s, Kim had fully consolidated power. There were no more rivals, no dissenters, no challengers, but he wanted more than control. He wanted immortality. So he began grooming his son, Kim Jong-il, not just as heir but as a second son, another divine figure in a country where gods were made, not born. North Korea had stopped being a nation. It had become a sealed echo chamber, built on fear, powered by loyalty, and ruled by a single bloodline. And when the world looked away, it prepared to sink even deeper. In the early 1990s, as the world celebrated the fall of communism, North Korea fell silent. Its Soviet lifeline, subsidies, fuel, trade, had vanished. China, shifting toward market reforms, pulled back its aid. North Korea, once fed by its allies, was now left alone to survive on its own ideology. But Juche, the philosophy of self-reliance, could not grow crops. And in the dark valleys and quiet villages of the countryside, people began to starve. It started slowly. Rice rations were reduced, then disappeared. People turned to grass, bark, tree roots. Children fainted in schoolyards. Parents collapsed in fields. By 1994, the food system had collapsed entirely. That year, Kim Il-sung died. His funeral was broadcast with waves of orchestrated sobbing, citizens falling to their knees, clutching their chests, wailing into the camera. But behind the public grief was something deeper, colder, terror. No one dared to weep too little or too late. Mourning was measured. Loyalty had a volume. His son Kim Jong-il took power. The transition was smooth because fear ensured it would be. But unlike his father, Kim Jong-il was more reclusive, more paranoid, and faced an immediate catastrophe, famine. The state called it the arduous march. It blamed the weather, foreign sanctions, natural disasters, but it was man-made. Farmers were forbidden to keep what they grew. Private markets were banned. Aid was refused or diverted to the military. The country's limited food reserves were prioritized for Pyongyang, the elite, while the countryside starved. People tried everything: grass soup, corn husks, sawdust bread, and then in the quietest corners of the north, something darker happened: cannibalism. Reports from defectors described parents eating their children, neighbors exchanging bodies, whole villages where silence was not due to mourning, but because everyone was gone. It became common for people to die slowly in the street, ignored, stepped over. Trains stopped running, factories stood still, corpses were dumped into shallow pits or left where they fell. The rivers carried bodies downstream. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 2 to 3 million people died, not in war, in peace. Under a regime that called itself flawless, the government denied it all. Foreign aid workers were banned from visiting the worst-hit areas. Meanwhile, propaganda broadcasts continued, praising the brilliance of Kim Jong-il, his genius in economics, his unmatched leadership. He had palaces, private chefs, imported cognac. His people had leaves and dirt. Those who tried to escape faced barbed wire and bullets. If caught, they were tortured. If they made it to China, they became illegal ghosts, hunted by border police, forced into silence, or returned to North Korea for execution. No public monument remembers the famine. No graveyard marks the loss. The regime erased it from textbooks, from speeches, from history. But the people who lived it remember. They remember burying their children. They remember trading watches for potatoes. They remember watching the sky, praying for rain, then cursing it when it came too late. And above it all, the portraits of the Kim family continued to smile. North Korea doesn't need open graves to hide its crimes. They bury people while they're still breathing. Across the mountains and valleys of the north, hidden from satellite eyes, fenced behind barbed wire, and erased from official maps, are camps that do not exist. To the regime, they are re-education centers. To the world, they are gulags. To the people inside, they are hell. There is no trial. There is no sentence. There is only disappearance. A man overhears a foreign radio station. A woman speaks ill of the regime while drunk. A child forgets to dust the portrait of Kim Il-sung. 3 generations vanish. This is the Yeon-jwa-jae system, guilt by association. If you are accused of a political crime, your parents, your children, your grandchildren follow you into punishment, not for what they did, but for who they are. These camps are divided by purpose. Some are for short-term indoctrination, others are permanent. Kwon-li-so, total control zones, where inmates live, work, and die without ever hearing the word release. Testimonies from survivors speak of forced labor in coal mines, logging camps, textile mills, 10-hour shifts on one bowl of watery soup, beatings for slouching, execution for escape attempts, starvation so deep that rats became currency and eating them was punishable by death. Guards were told that prisoners were not human, that mercy was weakness, that surveillance was sacred. Rape was common, pregnant women were forced to abort, infants born in secret were smothered or drowned, punishment was theatrical. In some camps, prisoners were forced to watch public executions of fellow inmates, hung from trees, shot in the head, or crushed under steamrollers. Children stood in front rows. Their silence was mandatory. There are no accurate numbers for how many have died in these camps, because North Korea does not count the condemned, but it is estimated that hundreds of thousands have passed through the Gulag system since the 1950s. Some were scholars, some were farmers, some were simply born in the wrong bloodline, and even now they remain. They rise before dawn. They work until their bodies collapse. They fall asleep beside corpses, and the world looks away. Occasionally someone escapes. Those who do carry memories like scars, memories they wish they could forget. One former inmate, Shin Dong-hyuk, was born in a camp. He believed his mother's execution was normal. He thought betrayal was love. He said freedom was terrifying because guilt followed him like a shadow. The regime denies everything. It calls defectors liars. It claims the camps are schools. It says the people are reformed. But the fences are still there, the towers still manned, and behind them generations still rot, unseen, unheard, and unloved. This is not a legacy of the past. It is the present. It is the system. It is North Korea. He was born, they said, on a sacred mountain, under a double rainbow, as a new star lit the sky. Birds sang his name. Flowers bloomed in winter. That was the myth. In truth, Kim Jong-il was born in 1941 in a Soviet military camp in Siberia, far from any sacred peak. But in North Korea, reality serves the leader, not the other way around. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, North Korea stood at the edge of collapse. Famine raged. Aid was blocked. The people whispered, but only behind closed doors. And then came the dear leader. Kim Jong-il had been groomed for decades. He ran the propaganda ministry. He built his father's cult. He rewrote schoolbooks. Now the son would become the god. But he didn't rule through charisma or revolution. He ruled through silk and silence. While his people ate roots, Kim collected foreign wine, Swiss watches, and rare cinema. He loved film, especially James Bond, and reportedly owned over 20,000 videotapes. He once had a South Korean director kidnapped to make movies for the regime, not for politics, for pleasure. His palaces dotted the country, each with a private lake, theater, and underground tunnel system in case of attack. Some were visible from satellite, others disappeared into mountains. But inside the palaces was paranoia. Kim trusted no one. He feared assassination, betrayal, even illness. His food was tested for poison. His staff was rotated constantly. He never traveled without armed convoys, decoys, and advance units to inspect every inch of ground. Outside his bubble, the people continued to starve. The famine of the 1990s lingered into the 2000s. Markets were outlawed, then tolerated, then banned again. The regime's grip tightened with every loss. Defectors who escaped through China were hunted down and repatriated. Some returned in cages. Others never returned at all. Kim responded not with compassion, but with weapons. He accelerated the nuclear program, withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003. North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in 2006. The world condemned it. Sanctions followed. But inside the Hermit Kingdom, the test was celebrated with dancing, fireworks, and forced loyalty. Why? Because Kim didn't need the world's approval. He needed its fear. Fear kept foreign powers at bay. Fear kept generals loyal. Fear kept citizens quiet. And fear, carefully distilled, became a tool of legacy. By 2009, Kim's health was failing. He had a stroke. His movements became rare, but succession had already begun. He had chosen his youngest son, a little-known, untested man named Kim Jong-un. The propaganda machine shifted. Jong-un's image appeared in state media. Crowds were organized to chant his name. Stories were invented of his brilliance, his genius, his unmatched leadership, even though he had never held real power. When Kim Jong-il died in 2011, the country wept. Cameras captured soldiers collapsing in grief, their hands clenched against frozen earth. Children screamed. Anchors sobbed through the broadcast. But behind the tears was a darker truth. A generation had been born, lived and died under the rule of two men, one who built the prison and one who ruled it in silence. Now a third would rise, young, unknown, and ready to prove himself in blood. In 2011, the world looked toward Pyongyang with quiet disbelief. The great leader was dead. The streets filled with choreographed mourning once again, soldiers howling in agony, broadcasters choking through sobs. But what truly stunned the outside world was not the tears. It was the man, or rather the boy, who now wore the crown. Kim Jong-un, barely in his 20s, had never led an army, never governed a province, never even given a public speech. Yet within days he was hailed as the great successor. Statues were prepared, propaganda adjusted, a dynasty preserved. He was the third Kim, more myth than man. But he didn't take long to prove that behind the round face and Western education was the same cold blood that built North Korea's foundation. The purges began almost immediately. In 2013, just 2 years into his reign, Jong-un ordered the arrest of his own uncle, Jang Song-thak, one of the most powerful men in the country. Jang had mentored him, protected him, smoothed the path to his throne. Now, he was dragged from a meeting, accused of treason, and executed. Not quietly, not discreetly. Some reports claimed he was stripped naked and torn apart by anti-aircraft guns in front of a crowd of officials. It was not just a death sentence. It was a message. No one is safe, not even family. Other officials followed. Generals, ministers, party leaders. They vanished from public life, erased from photos, their names scrubbed from the state. Rumors of flamethrowers, poisonings, even live dismemberment circulated among defectors. Kim Jong-un ruled not with experience, but with terror, and yet he played a double game. He modernized Pyongyang, built amusement parks, shiny skyscrapers, and new restaurants, visible only to the elite. He was photographed laughing, riding horses through snow, smiling beside rockets. He even dabbled in pop culture, allowing girl groups and flashy choreography, as long as the lyrics praised him. But while the surface glittered, the foundation remained concrete and barbed wire. The Gulags expanded, surveillance deepened. Every citizen, from farmer to surgeon, had to memorize and recite his speeches. Radios still couldn't be turned off. Phones were tapped. Foreign media, if discovered, was punished with prison, or worse. Defectors who escaped reported something eerie. Children spoke of Kim Jong-un, not as a man, but like a sun god. They knew his birthday better than their own. They recited his miracles in school, his ability to drive at age 3, shoot a perfect round of golf at 8, and compose operas in his teens. It was madness, wrapped in performance. But behind the performance was a very real threat. By 2016, North Korea conducted multiple nuclear tests, more powerful than before. Missiles launched over Japan, into the Sea of Japan, into headlines. Jong-un stood proudly at launch sites, clapping as fire rained upward. He had become the youngest nuclear-armed leader in the world. In 2017, tensions escalated. He exchanged threats with the US, calling President Trump a dotard. The world braced for war. Then unexpectedly came diplomacy. Summits were held. Smiles were exchanged. Jong-un walked across the DMZ, hand in hand with South Korea's president. He met the American president in Singapore. Hope, for a brief moment, flickered, but it was an illusion. No missiles were dismantled. No gulags were closed. No freedoms were restored. Kim Jong-un had done what his grandfather and father never could. He gained legitimacy on the world stage without giving up a single tool of oppression. The dynasty survived, and for the North Korean people, nothing changed. They still marched, still bowed, still watched their neighbors, still whispered in fear. A young ruler had stepped into his father's shoes, but he hadn't filled them, he had sharpened them. In most nations, propaganda is a tool. In North Korea, it is the air. It begins at birth. In hospitals where portraits of the Kim family hang above every crib, mothers are told their babies were born in a country chosen by destiny. In schools, children memorize the deeds of the supreme leader before they learn their own alphabet. Loyalty songs replace lullabies. Every textbook, every poem, every film praises one man. In every home, the faces of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il still hang on the wall, joined now by their successor. Not displaying them is treason. Not cleaning them daily is disrespect. State inspectors can arrive at any time. Dust is not just filth, it's defiance. And still, the people obey. They chant in unison. They march in sync. They write thank you letters to a leader they've never met, for food they don't have, for promises never kept. Meanwhile, in the shadows behind these choreographed scenes, poverty consumes the country like a second skin. Outside of Pyongyang, the polished facade reserved for the elite and foreign diplomats, life is bleak. Villages go weeks without electricity. Hospitals have no medicine. Children dig through mud for edible roots. Malnutrition is visible in every limb, every face, every school desk too small for the average child's age. The state rations have long since stopped. Hunger drives desperation, and yet the people smile when ordered. Not because they want to, but because they must. To look sad is suspicion. To look angry is rebellion. To speak truth is death. Yet, while the people starve, the sky over Pyongyang often lights up with fire, not from war, but from missile parades. Rows of soldiers stomp down Kim Il-sung Square, their legs swinging so high they nearly kick their own chins. Tanks roll behind them. Intercontinental ballistic missiles follow, carried on trucks designed not to defend a nation, but to impress it. Kim Jong-un watches from a balcony, flanked by generals and loyalists. He waves. The crowd erupts in cheers, perfectly timed, perfectly rehearsed. State television broadcasts every second. Editors cut between cheering citizens, dancing children, and soldiers in tears as the newest missile model is revealed, like a divine relic. But outside the camera frame, the cost of that missile might equal years of rice for an entire province. The government tells the people the missiles are for their protection, that the world wants to destroy them, that the supreme leader is the only shield they have. Fear is fed daily. News reports show maps of South Korean aggression, American threats, Japanese conspiracies. Citizens are told their leader is the only man alive who can outwit the West. Every missile launch is a miracle. Every provocation is painted as peacekeeping. And the truth is buried in silence. Even whispers of discontent are recorded. A wrong expression in front of a neighbor might bring interrogation. Children report their parents. Teachers report their students. Friends vanish without goodbye, and still the parades continue. The economy crumbles. The black markets grow. The lights go out in the provinces. But the music plays. The statues gleam. The missiles rise, because in North Korea, image is survival, and truth is the most dangerous enemy of all. For many in North Korea, the idea of leaving is not hope, it's suicide. The borders are sealed, not by fences, but by fear. To flee is to betray the supreme leader, to betray the nation, and in North Korea, betrayal is inherited. If you're caught escaping, your family pays. Your children, your parents, even your neighbors, they disappear with you, and yet they run, because the choice is not between loyalty and rebellion. It's between slow starvation and a slim chance at breath. The most common path is north, across the Tumen River into China. Shallow, narrow, sometimes frozen. On one side, soldiers with orders to shoot. On the other, a government that doesn't want you. In China, North Koreans are not refugees. They're labeled illegal economic migrants. That label is lethal. If caught, they're deported back. Repatriation means interrogation, torture, prison, and in many cases, execution. Women are the most vulnerable. Once in China, many are sold, not metaphorically, literally. North Korean women are trafficked into forced marriages with Chinese men, often in rural villages where no bride would willingly go. Others are pushed into underground brothels. They cannot speak the language. They cannot call for help. Their identity is their cage, and still some survive. They reach the South Korean embassy in a third country, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam. They wait in hiding. They pay brokers. They risk betrayal. If they're lucky, they arrive in Seoul with nothing but the clothes on their back and the trauma buried in their eyes. There they begin to learn the truth. They watch news they never knew existed, see food they were told didn't exist, discover that their homeland is not rich but starving, not envied but pitied. Some collapse from shock. Others refuse to believe, because for their entire lives they were told the outside world was a lie. Now the lie is all they have left. Even in freedom, escapes are haunted. Their accents betray them. Some are surveilled. Others are blackmailed by spies. Many never speak to their families again, because to contact them is to endanger them. There are organizations, churches, activists working in secret to smuggle defectors to safety. They call it the Underground Railroad of Asia. It stretches thousands of miles. It is dangerous. It is slow, but it saves lives. And yet for every success there are hundreds who don't make it. In one infamous case, that Jong-un, a senior North Korean diplomat in the UK, defected with his family in 2016. His brother was later arrested. His nephew disappeared. The regime called him human scum. Posters denounced him. His face was erased from official records, because escape is not just leaving. It is a revolution against a family cult, a challenge to a manufactured god. And gods do not forgive. The border remains. The river flows. The guards watch. But somewhere in the dark, someone waits for nightfall, for silence, for a single moment of weakness in the system. And when they run, they carry no bags, only the will to live. Because in North Korea, freedom is not a right, it is a crime worth dying for. To the outside world, North Korea was once a Cold War relic, a failed state, a punchline, a grey stain on the edge of the map. Then came the missiles. They rose silently at first, small, stuttering, falling into the sea. But each failure was followed by another attempt, and soon the launches were faster, higher, longer. With every fiery arc across the Pacific sky, North Korea's shadow stretched wider. The world stopped laughing. The regime had learned its lesson well. A starving country is ignored. A nuclear one is feared. By the late 2000s, under Kim Jong-il and then Kim Jong-un, the program accelerated. Nuclear tests thundered beneath mountains. Earthquakes followed, not from nature, but from ambition. Ballistic missile launches became regular performances, televised, celebrated, and aimed squarely at the conscience of the international community. Sanctions were imposed, resolutions passed, condemnations issued, but North Korea endured them all. Because for Kim Jong-un, nukes are not just weapons, they are insurance. Insurance against invasion, insurance against regime collapse. They are leverage, and he knows how to use them. In 2017, tensions reached a breaking point. Missiles flew over Japan. One intercontinental ballistic missile appeared capable of reaching the continental United States. North Korea released footage of a warhead re-entry. The world braced for disaster. Then, silence, and then smiles. Kim Jong-un, in a move no one predicted, walked across the demilitarized zone in 2018. He shook hands with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Cameras captured laughter, pledges of peace, even a symbolic tree planting. Hope surged. A few months later, he met with US President Donald Trump in Singapore. The first ever summit between a sitting American president and a North Korean leader. Talks of denuclearization echoed across the globe. Another summit followed in Hanoi. But behind the cameras, nothing changed. No warheads were dismantled, no inspections allowed, no human rights discussed. The regime gave vague promises, and in return, it got legitimacy. The man once seen as a tyrant now stood on equal footing with the world's most powerful leaders. Diplomacy became theater. In 2020, as the world was gripped by a pandemic, North Korea sealed itself tighter. Borders were locked, trade halted, foreign diplomats expelled. Inside the curtain, the regime grew even more silent, even more paranoid. Yet, missile tests quietly resumed. The world, exhausted, watched less closely. Sanctions faded into background noise, and North Korea returned to its pattern: provoke, pause, repeat. Meanwhile, its people remained isolated. They did not watch the summits. They did not read the UN resolutions. They saw only what the state allowed them to see, that their leader had stood among giants and made them listen. And so the cult grew stronger. Because diplomacy in North Korea is not about compromise, it's about control. And deception isn't just strategy, it's survival. The regime plays a long game. It plays with hunger, fear, and silence. And above it all, in underground bunkers and hidden launch sites, a new generation of weapons waits in the dark, ready to be lit, not in desperation, but in design. The modern nuclear threat from North Korea is not a glitch. It's the system working exactly as intended. The year is 2025. The world has changed. Pandemics have come and gone. Empires have shifted. Economies have risen, crashed, and reinvented themselves. But in North Korea, almost nothing has changed, except the weight of silence. The regime remains. The statues stand taller, cleaner, more sacred than ever. The faces of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un still watch from every home, every billboard, every classroom wall. The myths are deeper, the borders tighter, and the chains, they've become invisible. Surveillance is no longer limited to the neighborhood informant. It now exists in every mobile phone, tracked, filtered, muted. Though devices are state-issued and heavily restricted, they are also watched in real time. Artificial intelligence aids the sensors. The eye no longer sleeps. Inside the country, life remains a performance. Food shortages persist. Electricity is rationed. Markets rise in secret, then vanish when spotted. People smile on command. Children still recite their allegiance. Before every lesson, soldiers still march. Missiles still roll, and the supreme leader still waves from above. But beneath that surface, whispers continue. Defectors describe a new generation that knows more than they are allowed. Black market USB drives, filled with South Korean dramas, pop music, and even foreign news are smuggled across the border. A teenager, seeing freedom on screen for the first time, begins to question the world she was born into. These cracks are small, but they exist. The outside world, for its part, is no less trapped. Diplomacy remains frozen. Sanctions are enforced unevenly. China still props up the regime economically, while the West balances pressure with fatigue. The nuclear arsenal grows, quietly, methodically. North Korea no longer needs to make headlines. It already owns its narrative. Inside the country, Kim Jong-un continues to groom his sister, Kim Yo-jong, for power. She appears at major events, issues threats, vanishes, reappears. Her image is being shaped into the next pillar of the dynasty, because in North Korea, leadership is not passed down by merit, it is born into legend. What lies beyond 2025? There are three paths, and none are certain. Collapse, long feared, long predicted, may come suddenly or not at all. The regime is brittle, but brutality has held it together longer than anyone expected. Reform, the hope of every summit, remains distant. The system is too tightly wound, too soaked in blood and belief. Revolution, if it ever happens, will not be televised. It will come from within, quietly, dangerously, in places the regime no longer sees. But for now, the chain remains unbroken. A nation of 25 million people lives behind walls they cannot see, under lies they must believe, ruled by a family that has turned history into a prison, and the rest of the world watches, listens, and waits. Because North Korea is not a mystery, it's a warning.